I'm Brian Bonner, Chief Editor of the Key Post, coming to you live from the Key Post newsroom, 68 Zhelanska Street. We have a big topic and lots of experts. For the next hour, we're going to all get educated on the Green Deal and how Ukraine is going to catch up to the Green Deal and including how to catch up on green energy. There's a lot that needs to be done. We're still in the pandemic mode. And one of the benefits to the pandemic, if there can be such a thing as a benefit, was how, at least during the lockdown phase, the carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas emissions reduced, the environment cleaned up, the earth got healthy again, but the economy was flat on its back. So the Green Deal, as I understand it, strives for economic prosperity, prioritizing the health of the planet, in which the European Union has set this ambitious goal, one of the largest economies in the world, of net zero emissions of greenhouse gas emissions, so that the planet ultimately only increases in temperature 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, meaning reduced climate change. And it's a holistic approach. It's not just about renewable energy, all the way from food to pollution, and just how the economy is structured, including waste disposal and so forth. So it is, and it's not a law, as I understand it, or there will be laws, and it's not a requirement. And Ukraine will have but Ukraine will nevertheless have to do some things to join this and reap the benefits. As I understand it, the EU has two enforcement mechanisms, primary enforcement mechanisms. One is trade deals. They won't trade with countries that don't adhere to the Green Deal, or they will make adjustments. And the other is carbon tax adjustment, which is basically a penalty, as I understand it, on countries and factories that don't adhere to reduced emissions or environmental standards. So thank God we have Hlоя Алліо, who's, as I understand it, is new to Kiev, Ukraine, and she's with the European Union delegation, head of section Economic Cooperation, Energy, Infrastructure, and Environment. Hlоя, can you introduce yourself and explain your role here in Ukraine? And did I get the definition of Green Deal right?
Thank you. Yes, my name is Hlоя Алліо. I just arrived in Kiev, heading the section of the delegation dealing with economic issues, transport, environment, and economy within the operations section. So we deal with the project and the policy. Good evening to everybody. Good evening to other speakers. It's a pleasure to be here to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of the EU delegation to Ukraine. So I wouldn't exactly define the European Green Deal the way you have defined it. Actually, for Europe, the Green Deal is the new growth strategy. And the way we see it is a transformative agenda for the economy that would encompass all the area of the economy. So this is not only about climate and environment. This is really about a transformative process. And we are in contact with many stakeholders in Ukraine, including Alex Rябчин, that is you, and we're discussing how to support Ukraine in having this Green Deal approach in all the different areas of the economy. So it encompasses industrial strategy, transport, food production, food processing, circular economy. So this is, and of course, energy, environment, climate. So this is very broad. And I'm happy to maybe give a bit more background on the latest development on the Europe. So I don't know if you want me to give a bit of explanation now, or if just an introduction phase.
Great, Hlоя, if you could update us on developments.
Okay. So first, the COVID pandemic has not really altered the EU objective to follow the Green Deal. And it's perceived really, the economic recovery is perceived as an opportunity to accelerate the transition to green economy. And the Green Deal will continue to guide all our future policy development, including through our external relations, and in particular in Ukraine. We have intensive dialogue with Ukraine on this. As you may remember, we have mobilized 190 million euros to assist Ukraine to overcome the COVID crisis in spring this year. And we are very much supporting Ukraine in the green recovery. And in terms of Green Deal, I wanted to give you an update of the latest developments. So we had the Green Deal communication that was adopted last year that gave a broad overview. And then there are several pieces of legislation and reform that are ongoing in the EU. And you may have heard about the climate law regulation that was proposed by the Commission in March of this year. And the aims of this law is to enshrine into EU law the 2050 climate neutrality targets that was agreed by EU leaders, and to set the direction for all EU policies. And this climate law regulation is the adoption is foreseen at the end of the year. But recently in September, as part of the European Green Deal, the Commission has proposed to raise the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for 2030 from 40 to at least 55% compared to 1990. So this is still being discussed with the co-legislator in the EU. And there are other EU legislation that would aim at implementing and achieving the increased ambition. And these legislation are to be submitted by next year, by mid-2021. The first one would be the EU emission trading system, which is the EU's key tool to cut greenhouse gas emissions from large-scale facilities in the power industry sectors, and also in the aviation sector. And the emission trading system covers 45% of the EU's greenhouse emissions. And the second one, which would cover the rest, 55% of the total EU emissions, it's called the effort sharing regulation with member states, and these covers sectors that are not covered by the emission trading system, such as housing, agriculture, waste, transport. So the idea is to have the all economic sector covered by these two pieces of legislation, and EU countries have binding annual targets for cutting emissions in these sectors. And the third one is about land use exchange and forestry regulations. And all these three pieces of climate legislations will now have to be updated with a view to include this new proposed target of 55% reduction.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think this is just a brief overview of the
I
latest.
think that's a great overview. I mean, it's good to know there are benchmarks and deadlines throughout the process to the ultimate goal of 2050. Now, I want to turn in the studio in the newsroom to Alex Rябчин, who I've known for 6 years, former member of parliament, now an advisor on the Green Deal. Alex, we all lived through this. Ukraine missed the train to join the European Union in the 90s. That deal was done. How do we not miss the Green Deal?
Well, that's a really great question. And I would say that Ukraine are the one of the earlier, I would not say adopter, but the country that joined in a dialogue with the European Union about early modalities about the Green Deal. And thanks for Hlоя Алліо, who is actively helping Ukraine to participate in the process, to understand the process, because basically Green Deal is not an environmental strategy, as you rightly mentioned in the very beginning. It's an economic growth strategy, is an innovative strategy of the European Union. And there are more, yet it's like a political course which is transposed into more than 40 legislation initiatives, different procedures, and we as a country follows what is happening with the European Commission, what is now under the consideration to the European Parliament. So we are actively involved, and we are starting with our position paper. So basically in August, we sent an official position paper signed by the Prime Minister Denis Mihal to the European Commission Vice President Timmermans, who is responsible for the European Green Deal. We're still waiting for the reply. Chloe, we want to receive this reply from the European Commission, from the Vice President Timmermans. We hope to receive this until the December, because in December we will have the Association Council and a lot of governmental officials will travel to Brussels to discuss the things, including the EU Green Deal, because it's like so big. It's not only about the renewable, which is the topic here.
Right.
It's about the...
I agree. It's a holistic, it sounds like a holistic, complete change of mentality and the economy and so forth. That's the next question, though. I mean, how ready is Ukraine? Because this seems like an area where politics and public opinion are lagging behind science and policy.
Well, as I said, it's like renewables. It's from farm to fork. It's like innovation. It's like it's everywhere, and you need to follow. So every single Ukrainian ministry needs to follow what is going on in Europe in order to not miss the last train, or at least to get into the last coach and to participate into the value chains.
Is there a consensus politically?
Well,
because there's not in America. Where
there
I'm
is
from,
not a
obviously.
consensus in European Parliament. Even with this, there are countries that perceive European Green Deal as a threat. There are countries that perceive European Green Deal as an opportunity. Same as for Ukraine. We see where we can benefit from it, and we see something that I might say, scares Ukrainian business a lot. For example, carbon border adjustment mechanism, and we are meeting with Ukrainian business, and they are putting a lot of concerns about this mechanism, that it will hinder the Ukrainian development. We will lag behind in already developmental strategies that we have, and this is a kind of a threat for the Ukrainian business. And we as a government, I'm not a part of the government, I'm just a humble advisor. Humble advisor to the Vice Prime Minister and to the Minister of Environment. So, but the decision makers definitely needs to count that Green Deal is a reality. It's not about like climate, about environment. It's a like huge 5 years at least strategy of this European Commission, and definitely this is a course until 2050, which perceive climate neutrality.
Right, climate neutrality.
But for us, as we wrote in our position paper, we share the ambition of European Union, not because they adopted the Green Deal and we just like trying to do something. We perceive Ukraine as a civilized country. They have its own obligation to the Paris Climate Agreement, and in Paris Climate Agreement, every single country who adopted or ratified agreed to have a carbon neutrality till the end of the century. European Union said it will be 2050. We are still considering like when will be our climate neutrality, and this is a question to debate with the business, with the government, with our European partners. But
let's strip it apart. You're right, it's a broad thing, but if you take it to simple elements, which I have to do to try to understand this, is I understand energy production is the greatest contributor to carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse emissions. Our energy production is still heavily weighted on coal and other polluting industries. Further, I understand that the Ministry of Energy, like in power plants, has even delayed by 10 years a plan to reduce emissions. Furthermore, we don't seem to have a transition plan to reduce the dependence on coal. And if I may be so blunt as to say that, well, there's been progress in renewable energy, that has been a disaster too, because investors who had been promised a high tariff, a high guaranteed price, have not gotten the money. The Ukrainian government owes, I think, about $1 billion. The investors are clamoring that the Ukrainian government sells bonds, basically borrows to pay off the debt. None of these factors look like a country that's ready for the Green Deal.
Well, I have worked in the amalgamated Ministry of Energy and Environmental Protection, and I've been fired from this ministry the same day it was divorced again. So I know the situation from the inside, and it's really hard question. And by the way, I was for 3 months acting deputy coal minister, so I know the situation with the coal region also, and I'm from Donetsk, so it's a really like big and huge topic. By the way, 3 priorities, as you said, like let's move to some concrete step. 3 priorities what mentioned by the Ukrainian Prime Minister is like energy efficiency, restructuring of the coal mining region, and hydrogen. The more to discuss, but definitely the situation with renewable is a disaster. The situation with investors is a disaster, and I agree completely. It's really shameful to see like how it's going on with the feed-in tariff, that investors agreed to cut for their revenues, and unfortunately Ukraine as a state, I would not specify whether it's like parliament or government or any other state entities, yet definitely we guaranteed investors some return rate, and this has not been delivered. But I would not say only the situation about renewable market, I would say about a crisis into the energy market, and renewables it's a part of it, and definitely this is like I have 7 things for renewable in my list, and like first thing is like to help to resolve financial situation in renewable sector into the energy sector as a whole. Definitely it's a huge priority, and this is a very challenging task for the Ministry of Energy, and I do hope working hard to solve it.
Mm-hmm. What was the basic problem? They just overpromised something that they didn't have the finances to pay for?
Well, it's really interesting. Like, speaking honestly, we need to see the complex problem, and it's not my 10 minutes we will say. It's that the Ukrainian parliament lacked in launching the auctions. But why? Because I was in the parliament, I remember who lobbied the auctions not to be launched in 2018, just to wait it for more feed-in tariff to concentrate on themselves.
The auctions would theoretically be competitive bidding that lowers the price.
Definitely, and I do hope that the ministry till the end of the year will launch these auctions, yet it's not happening. But if the launches would be launched in 2018, I guess the situation on the financial market for the renewables will be different. So this is an appetite of investors, of course, if the state is promising and they have this kind of ability to have this income, so they will go for it. Also, the market was overwhelmed by the European EBRD also play some role in advocating for this. So it's a complex problem. The investor came, Ukraine did not deliver its obligations, so now we are here. It's not only the situation for renewables, we have the same problem with the Energoatom, we have the same problem with Ukrhydro, we have the same problem with the coal mine generation. So it's like the whole energy market reform, including feed-in tariff, including auction, including integration to NCE, to our European linkages, disconnecting with Russia. So huge amount, and coronavirus, of course, because the consumption fell, and this is a huge case. But I would say that we don't need to concentrate only on big renewables where we have problem. And Andrei, I bet, will say a lot about the small-scale renewables, about the energy decentralization. And this is, I would see, the big future of Ukrainian renewable development, because this is also Green Deal is about energy independence, energy prosumers. So not only the investors is like huge, it's a sacred cow should be for Ukrainian state, but also people should benefit. The simple Ukrainians who will install solar PV, the SMEs who will do the solar rooftop panels and will benefit from consuming this electricity. Because let's just think that in 2029 the feed-in tariff will stop acting, and we will receive a very cheap production of electricity. It will be, 1 or 2 euro per cent, and the coal generation will be non-competitive at all. We will see that the energy storages, which is now under discussion in Ukraine and the state and everywhere, the capex for the energy storage will decrease 2 times. So we will have generators that was able to store the energy. So we will see the whole transformation of the energy sector, and it's a big shame that now we have such a bad situation with the investor, that I do think that the government and the parliament and other entities needs to solve as soon as possible.
Okay, thanks. Let's move over, and I think Mr. De Zagon, introduce yourself, please, from the European Investment Bank. And before you explain the situation and the EIB's role, as I understand it, the amount of investment to succeed in the Green Deal is huge. I've heard estimates from 100 billion a year to 300 billion euros a year in the European Union, with the figure being tossed around from 2030 to 2015 of 4.6 trillion, or 1% of GDP. My understanding is that, first of all, does the European Investment Bank have that kind of money? And secondly, if I'm not mistaken, you're a key part of the strategy because you're going to phase out of fossil fuel investments and shift to green investments. Did I get that right?
You're completely right. I mean, let's start with the International Bank. Let's start with some figures. So at the end of this year, 2020, we will be absolutely compliant with the Paris Agreement. And yes, we will stop to finance fossil energy all over the world. So that is, if you want, the bad news. But that was the bad news. That includes also gas, which is not very nice for Ukraine. But there are some ongoing projects in the gas sector. Maybe we still can finish that one. That would be the only exception. Then the next target is in 2025. We want that 50% of the lending of the bank would be for the climate change. So today we are 30%. So we want to increase within 5 years to 50%. And the last figure I will come with, and probably it's one you refer to, is by 2030, we want that the bank has generated 1 trillion of investment for climate change. But that doesn't mean that we will do it. That's also including with other actors. But we want to be the one, the incubator of that, if you want. Now, the bank is lending about 65, 70 billions per year. So no, we cannot do that ourselves. But we want to foster that kind of things. Now, I just want to try a little bit on what Alex said. I mean, we are talking about challenges. We think there are challenges going on. And in challenges, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. And obviously, we fully understand that if we don't want to finance the fossil energy anymore, that is a challenge. It can be a challenge for countries like Ukraine, which is still very much linked to the fossil energy. Now, and I also have a lot of respect for what the government is trying to do and we have to do in the future about the coal mines. That's going to be very, very challenging. Now, being a bank, we also want to look at the positive side, and we will do a lot. The Green Deal is more than about energy. It's also about the food chain. It's about transport and so on. So there's a lot of opportunities with this Green Deal also. And I think that also that Ukraine has many assets to do something in this sector. And again, that was your first question, so I'm happy to continue.
Follow up, how do you view the investment climate then? Because obviously, European Investment Bank can be a catalyst, as you said, but can't do the whole thing.
Yes. So, I mean, the whole idea is that the key thing is to see where our action can be efficient. And I think obviously in renewable energy can be efficient. I think in the food chain, for example, we can certainly support a very good project. And I think also we should not forget the transport. I think we can also do a lot in terms of intelligent transport, public transport. And I mean, the energy sector in Ukraine for us represents about 1.1 billion. Transport is 1.5 billion today in the portfolio. And then we have also the municipal project. And the municipal project also, we look into transport. But we also look very much into energy efficiency. I mean, we have the pandemic, but still the banks try to continue to do the project. I think that is very important. It's one thing we had to cancel. We had a Green Day foreseen before the summer. I mean, the bank does one event per year for the neighboring country. And this year it was, we wanted to have that event in Kiev, and we want to have the event in Kiev around the Green Deal. We were extremely welcomed by the government of Ukraine on that one. They want to participate on that, and we had a lot of events planned. In fact, we have to postpone. Now, still, we had to postpone this event, but the bank is still targeting to do about 1 billion project in Ukraine this year. We signed 300, like Alex said, during the Ukraine EU summit 2 weeks ago. So, and we want to do 1 billion. Very much of this is towards the energy efficiency and the climate change. The 300 million is for public buildings energy efficiency. We expect to more or less finance about 1 billion buildings for that. Then we have another project which we hope to sign before the end of the year. We had one for 200 million on early recovery 1. We want to do a second one for more than 300 million. What we do with this project, we finance very much people, the internally displaced people. So we finance school, kindergarten, and so on. And again, what we try to do is make this building more efficient, energy efficient, and so on, and hospitals. Now, another thing is that the bank only finances in general 50% of the cost of the project, which means that there's space for other people also to contribute to the project. So if you put 200 million in a project, it means the project costs in general 200 million. So that means that other actors will also finance. Private sector, our friends from EBRD or the World Bank Group, for example. But yes, that's how we can foster more to that.
Thanks. You mentioned public transport, and as I understand it, behind energy production, that's another big contributor, the second largest contributor to carbon dioxide emissions. What are you doing in that area, or what's the optimal thing to do? Increase public transport and reduce private transportation?
Yes. I mean, you are living in Kiev like me, so I think public transport can be improved. I mean, you see. I mean, the traffic jam we have every morning and every evening with all the cars. So I think if we have a better public transport in the main city of Kiev, that's good. Also, we try to favor electric buses, electric trams, and so on. That will also help. But then it's a broader image probably also. I think the public transport is one thing, but also think about transport like inland water transport, like having more trains than trucks on the road and so on, but also intelligent system on the road. I mean, you want to see what the trucks are doing, what they're transporting, if they respect the legislation and so on. So there's a lot to do in the transport sector, and I think obviously that the trains and public transport is a very good way to help.
Okay, we're coming up on almost the halfway mark here, and I should said from the outset that this gathering is sponsored by ДТЕК, the largest private energy company in Ukraine, and we happen to have CEO Maxim Timchenko and happen to have Yöhan Бастін, who's the chairman of the ДТЕК Advisory Council. Yöhan, we've talked before, but can you give us your take on the good and bad? I know you have a few opinions on this subject.
The good and bad on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I would first of all I would define myself as very familiar with the Ukrainian energy sector. I was at the EBRD for 10 years, where I headed the group that was responsible for energy, electricity, including energy efficiency, transportation, municipal infrastructure, and I was co-chair together with the then Minister of Energy of the High Commission on Energy Sector Reform Ukraine. IMF participated in that, so that was EBRD and World Bank and another number of other international institutions. I'm on the board of several ДТЕК companies and supervisory board. I'm an independent member, non-executive. So I've been following the energy sector for quite a while in Ukraine, 25 years. First of all, we have been discussing electricity. The energy sector, of course, also includes natural gas. And in Ukraine, largely, the natural gas sector is more in line with what's happening worldwide. So the prices have been converging to related market prices in the EU. As a result, we see a much more efficient use of natural gas, and also incentives for producers to explore and exploit natural gas. The issue, indeed, as we have been discussing just now, is in the electricity sector. It is, as you mentioned, Brian, one of the it's the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in Europe. In Ukraine, it's different in a certain sense, because despite what we've been discussing, only 25% of energy consumption, electricity consumption, was generated by coal-fired and gas-fired thermal power plants. These plants are highly inefficient, and as such, they generate more pollution than they than their counterparts in the EU. But my point is that the thermal power sector is not a dominating sector, but it contributes disproportionately to pollution, to greenhouse gas emissions, and particularly CO2. What we have seen, and that's a very encouraging development, is over the past year the share of thermal power generation in total electricity consumption, because and consumption includes imports, and it balances out the export, is that the share has been fallen from roughly 34% 4 years ago to this year around 24-25%. So there is a marked change happening, and that's a result not just of COVID. COVID has had an impact. We think that total consumption in Ukraine this year will be around 136 terawatt hours. That is 10 terawatt hours below what you normally expect, perhaps a bit more. But it's not a dramatic impact. What has changed the picture is, first of all, the growth of renewables. It is way below levels in Europe, and that's a concern in itself, but it has been growing, and we estimate that next year there will be around 8 gigawatt in installed capacity, contributing to as much as 14% of total electricity consumption, or generating to meet about 14% of total consumption. And given that thermal power is the residual generator, the generator that has the highest marginal cost, its share will definitely drop. So any increase in renewables will go at the expense of thermal power generation. So overall, that's a good development. From a commercial point of view, for the private and public sector generators, it creates a problem, because they have to decide where the future lies. And in my view, there's no question about their gradual decline as a generator. It's much more how long it will take and what will be their residual role in the longer term. So overall, we see a good development. We were discussing before the situation in the renewable sector, and I know the rhetoric about high feed-in tariffs. I would argue, under current circumstances, even the highest feed-in tariff that we see in Ukraine is not enough, simply because it doesn't compensate investors for the risk that they're running. I mean, I've been in private equity since leaving the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, and we would not be investing in a country like Ukraine given the political risk. So yes, I know that proponents that say the tariff was too high, but if you look at the sector from a risk-weighted return point of view, it is not a good proposition. I think it's naive to think that auctions are going to resolve the problem, because any investor will take into account the uncertainties of a government that does not keep its word, and this is going to last a long time. As I said, I've been investing in renewables for 20 years, and there are certain countries where it will take a long time before you restore faith. So I think it's a very worrying prospect. Finally here, as by way of introduction, a sector that has been overlooked, and I fully agree, by the way, with energy efficiency. That should be a primary objective for a country like Ukraine that has one of the highest energy intensive economies in the world. But another area is distribution and transmission losses. Ukraine loses about 16 to 18 terawatt hours in distribution and transmission. That's partly technical losses, partly is theft. If you were to reduce that, you could to a level that's double that of the EU, so still very inefficient. But you would reduce it, you would save about 5 terawatt hours simply by investing in the grid, smart metering the grid, not consumption, but the grid, by reducing physical losses. That amounts to around 200 million euro per annum in savings, and to 1.5 ton of CO2 emissions that you million 1.5 million ton of CO2 emissions that you would save. So these are my initial brief comments on what has been discussed before. Brian?
Johan, what is the way out? I mean, is basically you're describing such risk and uncertainty that all investments in renewables are on hold. Is that basically the situation?
They're not entirely on hold, because in the end, as an investor, you look beyond the horizon of the current administration, and the fundamentals for renewables are solid in Ukraine in terms of the speed at which you can develop projects there, the less bureaucratic hurdles, as strange as it sounds. The renewable energy resources, so irradiation and wind speeds are good. They're better than most of Europe. The logistics are relatively easy. It's not a difficult place to build renewables, be it solar or be it onshore wind. So I do think at some point, and particularly since the so-called the levelized cost of energy are going down and are now converging to the average price that you will see in day-ahead markets, it means that at some point investors will say, okay, we don't need the government, we don't need subsidies, we will invest in renewables, provided, of course, that a number of technical issues have been resolved, like grid congestion, storage, as was mentioned before, at levels that are commercially viable. So I do think at some point investors will return, but that is in spite of the government and not thanks to the government. So I do see a way out. Another way is we were discussing the European Green Deal. I'm a passionate proponent of including Ukraine in the European Green Deal, for the simple reason that €1 invested in combating climate change in Ukraine has a much bigger impact than €1 investing in the EU, where it has a marginal benefit. In Ukraine, the pollution is still so high that you have a much better return as European Union on your investment in Ukraine than you would have in Europe. Now, Ukraine is excluded. Yes, Ukraine does get some subsidies now, but not within the framework of the Green Deal. But I do think it should be included in the Green Deal. Ukraine will be, as mentioned before, will be synchronized with the European network through ENSOI in 23-24. It has adopted the market principles, energy market principles of the EU. It borders 4 EU countries, so I think it's in the immediate interest of the EU to help fight pollution in Ukraine. Pollution doesn't know boundaries, like COVID-19. So yes, I do see. I'm optimistic about the future, provided that the EU, the government, do the right thing.
John, one final thing, you talked obviously about the pollution of coal, and Rina Akhmedov's DTEK is big into coal. What is the plan for getting out of coal?
It's not just the shareholder, the ultimate beneficiary shareholder. It is the reality that coal will be phased out. I think a very effective instrument, and also that was mentioned before, is ETS, to the European Union trading system. At the moment, the cost of CO2 emissions in Ukraine, and I'm talking against the interest of private generators here. The cost of CO2 emissions are low, are very, very low. EU at the moment, I think, is around 27, 28 euro per ton of CO2 emissions. In Ukraine is a fraction of that. So I think if you define a mechanism that you will have a gradual convergence of the cost of emission with the EU, let's say a 10-year path or 8-year path, you will see that at some point coal-fired power generation simply doesn't become, isn't commercially viable anymore. If you would apply current cost of CO2 emissions that you have in Europe to Ukraine, the cost of thermal power generation by coal-fired power plants would increase by 60%. And the markets are still dysfunctional at the moment, but you see some rationale in markets. See peach plants have come back because they can generate electricity cheaper than coal-fired power plants in certain circumstances. So overall, I think there's not enough lot you have to do other than applying sound market principles and also being consequent. The regulator in Ukraine is in my view, dysfunctional. It's not because it's against DTEK's interest. It's simply at the moment the markets are not functioning as they should. But I do believe they will be gradually going there. So, Brian, my answer to your question is it will happen by itself, provided that the government does the right things and tells the regulator to get its act together.
Okay, maybe we'll get back to a lot of those issues that you raised, but thank you for that description. We have our final guest, Andrій Zінченko, who hasn't spoken. He's with Green Incubator for more than 10 years in this sector. So welcome to the Key Post, welcome to this forum, and take it away. Please explain the Green Incubator and your take on the topic.
On the topic of Green Deal.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Ukraine's role in the Green Deal.
Well,
prospects.
I forgot one of the foreign observers who said about Ukraine. Ukraine is a country that you can never be sure how bad or how good it is. In Ukraine we say з журбою радість обнялась, which means literally the sadness is hugging the joy. It's Ukrainian situation. It's always like this here. So if we talk about Green Deal, it's an interesting holistic view. In my personal view, it's a bit of it tries to regulate way too many things. I think it needs more of a market thinking. But I think the European structures will, in this or the other way, come to that. And it seems to me that the European Green Deal is all about, paying for externalities and being honest with using this common resource, which is nature. When it comes to Ukraine, I think in this future green energy picture of Europe, we may have a very good place. We may, if we have good regulation. And we have big opportunities, really. Explaining about Green Incubator, sorry, I went into talking without explaining. I represent NGO Green Incubator. We've been pretty much promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency since 2010. And for the last 3 years, we have given away 900,000 euros of EBRD and European Union money to promote Ukrainian innovative low-carbon businesses. Those businesses do bring the change. And these are not just businesses in energy, most of them not. These are like guys who build houses which are carbon negative, made from technical hemp. These are companies that do hydroponics, which is food, again, that was mentioned here today. These are all kind of companies that create containers that allow for transportation of medication which does not require cooling. So all kind of technologies which are very relevant in terms of CO2 emissions. Even there is in Kyiv, in this city, we have a company that does 3D printing in titanium for aerospace companies in Europe and US. Mm-hmm. Why is that important, you may ask, from carbon point of view? Mm-hmm. It's simple. When you carve out details from titanium, which is very carbon intensive materials itself, you get scraps. With some parts for aerospace, you get like 90% of the material carved out, machined out. So you have these leftovers that disperse away. But with this technique, you have so many savings. Again, it saves CO2. So
So you're talking small scale, decentralized projects
No.
that are successful.
No,
Innovation.
I'm talking about companies which are now here small, and we have given, in most cases, they would receive like 50,000 of euros or something like this, but they have this opportunities to scale up, and from being small startups or small companies right now, they can go to being scale ups and large international corporates. Like, for example, we have this Ukrainian company which is called Prana. They do recuperators, and it's an energy-saving device, and they don't earn in Ukraine. Most of their money they earn with their 27 European offices. That's how they earn. So, in terms of businesses we have here, we have large prospects. Really, I think we can be very interesting to European Union, and we have large gas reserves. For the next 10 years, Europe, I doubt, will be able to get away from gas completely. So we can provide this, and we already started. Naftogaz already started providing gas reservoirs for European companies. I think that's a great cooperation, moreover, I know that European investors are interested in producing methane in Ukraine, like from biomass. Some are even talking about, I know maybe that's too far-reaching, about hydrogen. I'm not sure about that, but still, we have so many ways to cooperate with European Union. What is keeping us from achieving that is, we don't have now a green crisis. We have a crisis of regulation. It's not a market failure. It's a pure regulatory failure in its pure regulatory form. I'm a co-owner of energy cooperative. We are a small 200 kilowatts power plant owned by 97 people. Since June, the guaranteed buyer owes us 350,000 of hryvnias. That's a lot of money for my investors. And the problem is that the state just does not want to keep up its promises. I think, like, my bet, I can bet on a good, like Johnny Walker or whatever alcohol you prefer. I can bet that this or the next year, any kind of auctioning organized in Ukrainian energy sphere will be a huge, spectacular failure. Because if you don't have here in Ukraine, in energy sector, a good, let's say, if you cannot administratively influence it, you will not show up at that tender, at that auction, because you will not be able to defend that interest. And that pretty much shows up the very limited number of people who will show up at this auction. So auctions in Ukraine will not start. They may try, but they will fail miserably, because after ripping off the investors, it's try to attract new investors, because the investors tend to look at the countries and evaluate how good they are.
So everything will depend from the design of the auction, what it will be.
No, look, if you are government and I'm saying, hey, why would I believe you? You just ripped off the investors that came before us.
By $1 billion.
Yeah.
So far. Is this dysfunction, as Johan talks about, by design? Is it because of competing interests? Is it incompetence? What is it? And if we can't fix it, is it possible that the European Union mechanisms are exactly what we need? Carbon adjustment tax, basically trade deals conditioned on Ukraine's, gas house emissions reduction and moving to clean energy and so forth. Basically external regulation if we can't do internal regulation.
That might be a way, but I'm not sure, because like now Ukrainian government is in direct breach with the law which was adopted in 2015, the law on electricity market. the law says, Article 61 and 62, if I'm not mistaken, you cannot do cross-subsidizing. The support for vulnerable should be via address
Subsidies.
cash subsidies, yes. And they made this decree by the cabinet of ministers. We do it the other way, just as it is prohibited. Even after the European energy community says it's wrong, they still, it's not really on our agenda. So I think in a year or in a year and a half, the big international investors will go to courts, and then Ukraine will learn the hard way what it means to lose. Well, it will take a couple of years, but we will lose in this. We will lose in these cases, and the people who know these things, the people from Ministry of Justice, they say, as a start, will say, "Oh, settlement, please, settlement." Well, that's how it will be. So we will learn the hard way, as Ukrainians we do. We always learn the hard way, but I think after that there will be some kind of, we will gather up and reconsider how the whole thing should develop. I think the critical change that we do need today is what is called, which is not related to energy, what is called full European cycle of policy development. That you cannot develop a policy without due dialogue with all the stakeholders, because, well, now you can have just one member of the parliament who will just write a strange law and pass it through committee, pretty much without much of discussion, and it can be adopted in a closed committee meeting, not even in a committee room, without notifying anyone.
Policy done behind doors.
Yes.
But, I would respectfully disagree, because exactly like 1 year ago, the laws that in 27th article on the European directive, so related to energy, treaties or to our DCFTA, we need to consult before adopting them with Rada, or even before submitting it with Rada, with the members of parliament or with the government. They need to be discussed with the European Commission. So it's worked and strictly worked. So the committee, if they will pass a law not according to this, like they will be under severe critique from the European Commission. And now I know that there are a lot of discussion how to do this mechanism, because it was adopted 1 year ago, and currently it failed several times, but now it's under the big consideration.
There are two responses to this. First, I like the idea. Second, first they need to consult with us, with Ukrainian citizens, not with European.
This is direct democracy. They are the member of parliament, and you delegated this right to them.
No, they need to talk to the industry. And last year they allowed imports from Russia and Belarus without talking to anyone. And I would like to quote here, this theory is the same as practice, but in practice it's not. So that's what you're saying, how it should be. But in practice, it just doesn't work.
I voted for this in the previous parliament. We have this. In practice, it's not working perfectly, but it works.
Well, that means it's defective by design. If it's not working, it's defective by design. And this particular government does not want it to be working, because they want, to have the optionality, to play around with these things.
Not everything is related to government. There is a parliament that
government in a wide sense,
It's like, you see, like it's interesting that, for example, in Europe, the European Commission proposed a climate goal to 2030, 55% reduction, the ambition.
Yeah. Yes.
But the member of European Parliament said, no, we want to have more ambitions, and they voted for 60%. And now the European Commission seems like how they are able to execute this. So this is how the government works. Not always coincide with itself, but
yeah, I'm okay with dialogue between parliament and government. That's okay. I mean, there should be basic rules, and these basic rules are now not working. So we can have laws passed without consulting with anyone. And there is this great principle: there should be no things that regulate our lives without our participation.
Sorry for our discussion, because in the previous parliament,
yeah.
Andrei was my advisor, and
we still had many.
You still had the debates.
yeah, and I love that he always was honest to say whether to criticize or to praise, and I love this guy very
I think
much.
that's good. It means you're not living in a bubble. We're down to our closing minutes. I want to bring the people back on the screen for either final thoughts, Johan, or how does Ukraine undo the damage? I mean, let's face it, the Green Deal is an incremental thing for 30 years. So what is an incremental step? And I'd like to ask this to everyone, that Ukraine can do to improve what is been described as a dysfunctional, risky environment.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm happy to see that Ukraine continues to be the youngest, the oldest promising young boy on the block. I'm very happy to hear Andrei's thought, and I agree with most of them. I think one of the fundamental shortcomings in the system now is that tariffs are simply too low. And this is very populist policy where the president doesn't want to increase tariffs and has nailed his flag to that mast, and it doesn't make any sense because there's not enough cash generated in the system to meet all the needs. I'm not saying about profit, the needs that the system has. You have distribution losses, you have inefficient generation. At all levels, this is running towards a disaster. It's unheard of in the world that you use taxpayers' money to subsidize electricity consumption. And that is effectively what you're doing if you get sovereign loans from the EIB and EBRD to have cash to meet your obligations. So tariffs need to be increased. If that is going to happen, you will see that people start saving electricity, energy efficiency will become much more easy. And of course, we need to protect the vulnerable, but the mechanism being used now is proven everywhere. Since 30 years, it doesn't work. You cannot subsidize consumption. You need to subsidize individuals, as was mentioned before. So I do think if you would start with very basic, simple things, increase tariffs to levels that make sure that the electricity sector and the whole system is economically and financially sustainable. If I say economically, means it includes ecologically or environmentally, then that will be a massive step. And I do think that will be viewed positively by the European Commission. The European Union needs Ukraine as much as Ukraine needs European Union. It sounds very bold, but if you look, there is a trade balance surplus from the EU into Ukraine. It borders 4 EU countries, so it is a massively important country of significant size. So I do think, and that's my second recommendation, I do think the government needs to engage, needs to make sure, the government of Ukraine needs to make sure that the EU, the Commission will consider including Ukraine into the mechanisms of financing the European Green Deal, and that will be to the benefit of the EU, much more than subsidizing reduction pollution in the Netherlands, which is already at the very marginal level. So tariffs, very important, increase those. Fully agree. Liberalize the markets. Everywhere we have seen in Europe where markets have been liberalized, the consumers benefit from. Everywhere prices are going down simply because there is competition, and private operators are not afraid of competition. They welcome competition because it brings transparency. At the moment, the markets are not transparent.
This is great. Any closing thoughts, Chloe or Jan-Erік, from the European perspective?
I cannot submit my video.
2 minutes for me.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
You're here.
Thank you. Yes. Just no. As Alex Rябчин said, we are very happy to engage with Ukraine on dialogue on Green Deal, and we have this focus dialogue that will now be launched that was agreed during the last summit a few days ago. And the kickoff meeting with the Prime Minister and the Vice President Timmermans of the Commission will take place at the end of the year. And we are preparing actively with the government. But this is not only, as I said, one ministry. We have an encompassing approach. We want to acknowledge that Ukraine has already adopted a fair number of legislation in the green issues, and we are further supporting these efforts, being from the adoption of legislation and implementation through a lot of technical assistance projects. We now have a big project that is dedicated to Green Deal that we are starting now, where we involve all the different ministries, and that also helps to have this encompassing approach. As I said, we're active in many areas. And one I wanted to mention in particular is energy efficiency that was mentioned, because I think, to come back to what you were saying at the beginning, European Green Deal is all about trade and carbon tax. This is a counterexample because the EU has invested quite a lot, over 100 million in the energy efficiency fund, which was launched a year ago. And this fund aims at supporting renovation in residential buildings. We have now a number of applications from homeowners association that is speaking. And we see that many Ukrainian families will benefit from that. And this is actually have a lot of benefits. First, it increases the energy security through also reduction of the demand for energy. It improves the well-being of the citizens that live in these buildings, and it also creates new markets, because the investment in this renovation of buildings will also help alleviate the impact of the crisis. And it also creates new jobs, specialist jobs, for instance, energy auditors, project managers in energy efficiency. So this is to show their opportunities, economic opportunities, with being active in the Green Deal, and this is very important to pass these messages. And that was mentioned also during the debate. It's important not only to work with the government and Green Deal, fully agree. We are also supporting outreach efforts of different stakeholders on Green Deal. Now, for instance, we're preparing a climate webinar where we'll involve a wide range of stakeholders, including businesses, civil society, local authorities, where we want to also have high-level participation from the EU side. And this is the objective, to reach out as wide as possible. So to conclude, just to say, the EU is fully committed to support and assist all stakeholders in Ukraine in the Green Deal. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a lot of incremental steps, Chloe. Mr. Dezagon, European Investment Bank, last word.
Yes, so thank you. No, I fully support what Johan said. We need an efficient, competitive, and transparent energy market, and that is absolutely true in the electricity market. So that I fully agree on, and we fully support that. The second thing I think is also about energy efficiency. I think that is also something where the government probably has to continue to do a lot. I think that Johan also talked about the grid. The grid is losing energy. It's not efficient. That's something the bank is financing, and we will continue to that. I think also energy efficiency is one of the important thing. I'll also, on that one, energy efficiency, I think we have to think about this district heating. I think lots can be done, invested in district heating to make it more efficient. And finally, that's my last remark, I think we also agree that it's very important that an agreement is found between the government and the investors on the renewables, because yes, it's important to keep attracting investors to the country.
Got some great steps. You guys, 1 minute each.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I like the discussion. Thank you for getting all these great people together, and I bet that I myself willing to live in the country where politicians, when the government, when the parliament, when everybody fulfilling their promises. Either political, if you promise to your partner, you deliver, no matter how it would cost to you, or legally binded promises, because definitely it was mentioned, my favorite topic, energy efficiency. Unfortunately, Europeans did a lot to invest in Ukrainian energy efficiency, and Ukrainian MPs also need to vote for a budget where the energy efficiency fund and warm loans and more other energy efficiency related programs needs to be funded. This is also a problem with our negotiation, but we would like to explore an opportunities, and as Chloe said, we have a huge amount of opportunities starting from, I don't know, agricultural, organic farming, e-mobility, charging infrastructure. We have great innovators that are able to supply chargers for Europe to link up, I don't know, Kiev and Brussels and Lisbon with the EVs, and we have more EVs than, I don't know, Russia and Poland all together, and I love this topic very much. In every single area we have a lot of green opportunities. We will definitely explore them together is a part of our European integration. And of course we have challenges with renewables. Ukraine needs to fulfill its obligation. Challenges with carbon border adjustment mechanisms. Ukraine also needs to do some reforms, but I do hope that our partner relationship and our DCFTA will protect us from some of unfriendly that one might
The free
consider.
trade agreement, yes.
Yeah, so definitely we will work closer because we would like to live with a pure environment, with a great water, with a great air, and dedicate our efforts to combat the global catastrophe, which is climate change, which definitely Ukraine needs to tackle together with the whole civilized world.
All right, thank you. Andrei.
Well, my opinion is very conservative here. I think the first thing we need in all these spheres is a judicial reform. We need courts where I can protect my rights, where business can protect their rights. So this is the first and the most fundamental thing to do. And the other things they are building up on top of that. Before business is secure, that they can protect their rightful and lawful interest, nothing will move forward. And as we go, after that, like after we do this, we can liberalize the market, we can tone down the populism and say, okay, we'll increase the prices, but we protect the poor, so that it goes after. First, we need to make sure that in our country there is justice. Everything works on top of that.
Okay, this is great. I want to thank all the guests for
Thank you.
taking such a complicated issue, making it simple and understandable to the public, to me, for certainly, and that's a big achievement because it is a tough issue, and doing it all within an hour. So I want to thank DTEK, of course, for bringing us all together. And we'll sign off. This whole conversation will be up on the internet for posterity on the Kyiv Post YouTube channel, Facebook page, and on the website. So thank you all, and good night. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for inviting.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.